Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Film Haven Reviews. I'm your host, Sawyer, as always. And today we are starting a brand new theme called the 70s Neo-Noir theme. And I wanted to do this for a long time, actually. I've almost done this theme several times, but have still having a hard time on landing on my third movie. I've got a couple in there. There's one with Robert Mitchum that I like, but honestly, the poster isn't very good, and that is a problem for me when thinking about the visual aspects of, well, I guess now the YouTube, but also the Instagram, and I like my posters. But anyway, so one of the reasons why I decided to press go on this theme now is because, well, Gene Hackman died, and so not this movie, but next week we are going to be doing the movie Night Moves, which is one of his most famous films, and I've never seen it. I didn't even really know it existed until a couple months ago when I was looking into 70s noir films. So the reason why we're doing, of course, Chinatown today from 1974 is because it's very interesting to me to think how old noir is as a genre. That in the 70s, a movie like Chinatown is seen as revitalizing noir for the modern world, and that was the modern world as it was 50 years ago now. So I that's why I'm calling these 70s neo noir, because I mean we have neo noirs today, but the idea of neo noir is the new noir. So I don't know. I thought it was fascinating that noir is so old that they were doing throwback noir films in the 70s. And in the case of Chinatown, they're taking the noir film, calling back to it, and then successfully able to kind of revitalize and refresh the genre in new ways. Particularly if you look at the movie, it is in color, whereas most noir films before this was in black and white, of course. I'm sure you could find an example here or two that were in color, but this movie definitely popularized noirs in the new world of the 70s. Anyway, so there's a lot to get into. I didn't even do a lot of research on this movie because I knew there was so much to talk about, just from my own observations, and I want to try to keep this to 30 minutes if I can. Uh, so there's really not enough time to get into kind of the meta stuff behind, like the making of and all that kind of stuff, because there's just so much to break down within the movie itself that let's just talk about it because I'm really excited. So yeah, overview. Let's get into it. 9 out of 10. Definitely giving it a 9 out of 10. If it wasn't for just maybe a one or two things that we'll get into later, definitely would give it a 10 out of 10. I was expecting this to be pretty good, and it delivered, and not only delivered, maybe even surprised me in a few ways. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. And I really did. They talked a lot about it in film school when I was there. And so I knew that it was very famous and very iconic. And of course, I've seen little clips here and there, especially the ending scene. I've seen bits of the ending scene many times. So I knew what to expect, and I still was impressed, which is a good sign. On IMDb, it's got an 8.1 user score and a 92 Metascore. So I'm pretty much right in the middle there, a little bit on the critic side, 92. I'm at 9 out of 10. So I think I agree with the critics, but 8.1 is just one of the best. I mean, I'm sure if you look at the top 200 on IMDb, it's based on user scores, this is on there for sure, maybe even in the top 50. So definitely worth the hype that it has for it, and it's just an iconic movie. Things I liked about the movie, looking at the overview, is that it's beautifully shot. One of the things that I've complained about, and I'll talk about it till I'm blue in the face, is that in the 70s in particular, for some reason, I feel like the camera quality just fell off a cliff. Maybe there's something about it that is because there's a lot more independent films that are being born in the 70s. That's probably a big bit of it. New camera technology, and sometimes the using different cameras, maybe more portable cameras, aren't as high quality, but it's easier to make, and so lower quality, grittier movies are made in the 70s. The 70s is known as a very gritty decade for filming. And this movie, though, is a very good exception to the grittiness. It is very crisp, extremely crisp film. And considering that the movie takes place in the 1930s in Hollywood and LA, definitely serves the film well to be so crisp because everything is so beautiful, as we'll get into it later. We look at a movie, speaking of Gene Hackman, that I did a long time ago, French Connection, a William Friedkin film. That movie was extremely low picture quality, very gritty on purpose because it's, we have Manhattan in the 70s and it's very tough and gritty and gross. But then you look at another Manhattan or New York film that I did recently, which was The Warriors. That movie by Walter Hill was very crisp and pretty and beautiful, while also showing how grimy New York could be in the Bronx and stuff like that. So don't necessarily have to be grimy in your movie, but in that one they did. So speaking of the 30s in Hollywood and LA, that's one of the best parts of this movie too, is the sense of setting. The setting of 1930s Hollywood and the drought that's going on, which is definitely something that was happening at the time as well. LA famously now, of course, it's either drought or it's forest fires or it's mudslides when it rains too much. It's just obviously the whole city was built on a desert and it's by the coast. And so there's just all kinds of weird things going on with that city in the environmental sense. And this movie plays on that very well. So this drought that's happening in the movie it infuses itself into the history of the film, the history of LA, and also into the actual narrative itself. So the way that the setting is played with in this movie is honestly masterful. So that's one of my favorite things about it. The score is perfection. This score is one of the best scores I've seen in a movie in a long time. It completely makes the film, just like all these other things I'm going to talk about, makes the film, which is why it's a 9 out of 10, because there's just so many things that are just crucial for this film in order to make it work, and they all do it so well. Definitely going to have a whole breakdown on the score later, so I don't want to get into it now. But another thing that just has to point out is just the main character. Jack Nicholson as JJ Geddes is just Jake Geddes, or Geddes is just, oh man. I mean, this is one of those all-time iconic roles. His character is so, it's interesting because he has like kind of a lightness about him, but at the same time, there is limitless depths. The way that they introduce his history and hint at it without showing you. It's just, once again, I'm going to use this word a lot probably in this movie, but masterful. It was just a masterful character, and I can see why this is seen as one of Jack Nicholson's best roles, up there with the other 70s and 80s roles, like, of course, Jack Torrance in The Shining and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. All just really great roles. This is a good time for him, obviously. It's why he's one of the most iconic actors of all time. And I think from movies that I've seen, oh man, I mean, I think this might be his best role, honestly. It's been a long time since I've seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, so maybe that's his best movie. But the way that he is able to be cool, but also be funny and like not take I think the movie doesn't take his character too seriously, which is really nice. But anyway, we're going to have a whole section on him too, so we're going to get in more into that as well. So that's it for the overview. Let's get into the narrative, because it is pretty dense. Obviously, it's a noir film. It wouldn't be a good noir film if it wasn't dense. So I'm going to try to break it down as best I can. I'm going to stop about halfway through for spoilers, because obviously with a noir film, it's a mystery. And I know this movie came out, 51 years ago, but still... some people may not have seen it, and if you are holding out on it, maybe wait until it goes. Go watch it. It's on Paramount or MGM Plus right now, on Prime, and I think that's the best way you can see it at this current moment in time. But I'm sure you could rent it on Prime as well. So let's go into the narrative. So we have Jake Geddes, obviously played by Jack Nicholson, and he is a private investigator, used to be an LA detective. Miss Mulray hires him to find out if her husband is being unfaithful. There's great scenes afterwards where Jake is doing his PI thing and he's finding out. And of course, he does eventually find out that her husband, who works as a water commissioner for the city, once again, bringing that droughts and environmental stuff into the narrative, finds out that he is having an affair, or at least he has evidence of it, only to later come back into his office to find that a new woman is there who is giving him a subpoena, or at least a cease and desist letter, saying that she is the real Mrs. Mulray and that the last person was an imposter, hired him to find this evidence of an affair in order to besmirch his name. So that is like the real hook, I guess, of the movie. Definitely for me, when I'm watching it, when we get to that moment where she's like, I'm Mrs. Mulray, and you're like, wait a second. That was a great moment. I mean, it comes in about not even 20 minutes or so into this 2 hour and something and change movie. And it just really just takes your captivation and just sucks you in. I mean, you're in now, because you're like, okay, well, that's weird. That's a good head tilt right there. So this is like as far as I would want to go if you are still waiting on seeing the movie. If you don't want any spoilers, that's a good hook for the film. It only happens 20 minutes in. Go watch the movie, come back, listen to the episode. But from now on, we're going to be talking spoilers and everything. So now Jake must try and get to the bottom of the Mulray confusion so he can clear his reputation, only to be pulled deeper and deeper into a whirlpool of citywide corruption and backhanded land deals that threaten to alter the future of Los Angeles and its surrounding counties forever. And of course, he's also falling in love with the real Mrs. Mulray, played by Faye Dunaway. So, it wouldn't be a noir film if he wasn't falling in love with the main girl who's sending him out on these mysteries and stuff. So she's the focus of the mystery, but she's also the romantic interest. Very classic. Gets to a lot of this movie does well, which I'm going to say probably multiple times, which is that it successfully calls back to the noir tropes while also pushing forward into the modern age. So it's just like a great marriage between the past and the future. If you're going to revitalize a genre, this is how you do it. I'll say that. So that's the narrative for us. And let's get into the specific aspects that I really wanted to talk about because there are a lot. So the cinematography, first of all, wow. Like I said, the picture quality is crisp. That's one of the best things. But as I talked about, the setting is going to be kind of being brought up a lot in this review just because, like I said, it infects everything within the movie. So you have like the setting comes in with the history, comes in with the narrative, and it comes in with the cinematography. Because we're setting this movie in Hollywood land, 1930s LA, we have just some beautiful shots of the surrounding areas of LA. Definitely some of my favorites are some of these grandiose shots of like, there's a rocky beachfront, lots of beaches, some really good beach shots. There's one at the Albacore Club where you have the lighthouse at the top of the cliff, and you've got one where he's in a giant orange grove, which is very California. And then some of my favorites is he keeps coming back to this dried out river. I guess it's the LA River that's been dried out because of the drought. And it's just these scenes with both of the scenes with that dried out river is great because it also shows the mystery of the film because he's kind of he's still investigating Mr. Mulray, and then also some of the sound bits, the score bits in those scenes, which we're going to play that later when I talk about the sound. You'll see what I'm talking about. Just those piano tingles that really give you that sense of mystery and that sense of curiosity. Like, I really want to look into this film. You're leaning into the narrative because it's all these different facets. The beautiful cinematography giving you the sense of space, giving you the sense of setting, and also the score coming in and making you feel completely engaged in everything that's going on. Then you have the acting from Jack Nicholson. So yeah. The smaller shots, too, are also pretty good. There's one that's really great that I love, which is outside of this apartment complex in Echo Park. Jake is kind of going in and investigating, and just the symmetry of that shot is really well done, and it feels very California, but it also just on its own is just a great shot. I really liked it. Then just talking about noir throwbacks, there's this great scene where Jake and Mrs. Mulray are talking, and just the way the lighting, it's inside this car, and the way the lighting is hitting against their face, it's very classic noir. Of course, you have the shades that are going across their eyes, and the scene itself is is a very good narrative moment in the film. And so you've got this, once again, marriage between the quality of the craft and the quality of the acting, quality of the script writing. Everything is kind of coming together while also harkening back to the noir genre and then just doing it well, which is just very good. Very, very good. Speaking of the noir lighting, there's also just the beginning, Jake's office in the intro is just so, like, I was immediately like writing notes like, okay, that's noir, that's noir, that's noir. You've got the shades, you've got the old fan even in there. I mean, so many different things in that scene that are just screaming noir, just letting you know, like, this is a private investigator. This is a noir film, if you didn't know already. So all that stuff too, as I've been alluding to, has just been accentuated completely by the score, which is the next thing that we're going to get into. So the score, we have to break down the score because it is essential to the effectiveness of this film. It's not just moody brass all the time, which is what a lot of noir films are. And of course, there is a lot of that if you want it. But it's also the little piano tingles like I was talking about earlier, which heighten that curiosity, like in the dry river scene. There is also this great low piano score that comes out sometimes. It is very effective, especially at the scene in Echo Park. And a great example of that kind of the whole thing coming together, especially just kind of building up tension in the film, is there's this great scene outside of this bougie retirement home where there's things escalate really fast and the score is just boom, it's right there. And then, of course, at the end of the movie, there's the score just really hits when they get to Chinatown, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But before we get into that, let's get into Jake, because Jake Gittes is one of the best protagonists of any movie ever, I have to say. He's such a fascinating character. He's smooth and savvy while also being rough and abrasive at times. He kind of plays a very complicated character, 100% not a one-note character. He is a three-dimensional character. And when you have someone like Jack Nicholson playing that character, it's just, I mean, just take it away. So he has all these like this past, this history that kind of trickles into the story, but they don't really explicitly tell you. Even by the end, you don't really know the details of what happened in Chinatown, but you kind of get the sense of that there's a cyclical nature to what's happening in the current story to what has happened before. And I just really love the way that they hinted at it, rather than just beating you over the head with it. It once again shows like kind of a masterful hand that knows how to do subtlety in order to get maximum effect. So I love, one of the things too is his little detective tricks. Those are great. He has tons of little, because this is 1930s, because honestly, I mean, there's more noir films in the 40s, I would say, than in the 30s and maybe even the 50s. I had to brush up on my noir history a little bit, but I know obviously that I would imagine noir was born in the 30s. Having it set in the 30s is really interesting. And I think with this detective, this private investigator who is using these detective tricks from the 30s, it has like an extra kind of layer of effectiveness where, for example, he has a bunch of like watches, like these little small, like kind of stopwatches kind of things in his glove compartment. And he's tracking Mr. Mulray, and he's can't wait anymore because he's been kind of staking him out. So he decides to put this little watch underneath the tire of his car. So then later he can come back and see where when the car ran over the watch and stopped the watch, broke it. And he knows that's when he came back. That's when he left the area. So it's a really good way of getting like, I was like, it's not like a GPS tracker. What's he going to do with this thing? And then it dawned on me and I was like, oh, that is so smart. You can get a timestamp of when someone left somewhere by literally stopping the clock by his car. I thought that was really well done. A lot of different like little effortless little things that he does, like steals a guy's business card only to later impersonate him using the car in order to get access into an area. You know, he's just kind of too cool for school, going, grabbing the business card when the guy's not watching, and then just effortlessly goes through a very high security area later using the guy's business card, because this is the 1930s and no one has a way to check whether you're the guy that you're saying you are or not. And if you have the guy's business card and you have the confidence to just walk through, then the cop's going to be like, okay, go ahead. Sorry for stopping you. You seem like a very important man. But anyway, he also does psychological tricks as well, like playing off people's annoyances. Like he annoys his way into getting his way. There's a great scene where he's trying to get an audience with one of the people that are up on the up and up in the higher echelons of this water company. And so he's talking to the lady up front at the office, and she's kind of like giving him, of course, the runaround, saying, oh, he's not here, or I don't know when he's going to be back. You know, obviously, like, you don't have access to him is what she's doing. And he's like, okay, I'll wait. And so he sits around and looks around at the photos. And then this way he actually gets a bunch of information, because she's so bored and annoyed with him, and he just has all the time in the world, apparently. He starts asking about the photos on the wall, and she starts angrily giving him all the information he needs, and finds out that Mr. Mulray and Faye Dunaway's father were in business together. And so that's like, oh, okay, there's definitely a connection here because, of course, I didn't mention earlier, but, we're not talking too much about the story. After Mrs. Mulray asked the real one, Faye Dunaway, asked him to stop, investigating or to sue him, he starts to, of course, investigate further because he's like, okay, well, this makes me look bad, so I need to figure this out. And I think a part of him is also just curious. So he needs to talk to Mr. Mulray and figure out what's going on. So, of course, as soon as he finds Mr. Mulray, Mr. Mulray has a little death problem. Yeah, he's been thrown into the drainage ditch and has been drowned. So he's murdered. So that's like kind of why all this is important to figure out who he is connected to and how. So now it becomes a murder investigation and like, okay, he comes out murdered. What's actually happening? And that's where that rabbit hole kind of stuff goes into. I know we're talking about Jake, the character, but narratively, I also thought this movie was incredible. So I guess I could talk about that for a second. I didn't even plan on that, but the fact that everything just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and he's opening in this new areas of corruption, and Jake, the character, bringing it back to him, is falling deeper and deeper into the curiosity rather than what's in it for him. At some point, it's not about him anymore. It's about, well, really, as he gets more romantically interested in Faye Dunaway's character, Mrs. Mulray, he starts to care more about what happens to her, and so it becomes less personal, self-personal, and more personal as in him caring for her and what happens to her. So that also shows a dynamicism, trying to bring it back to his character, a dynamicism in his character. So he at first he seems like this guy who is only out for himself and doesn't really care about anyone else. And everything he does is kind of him just trying to, get a better situation for himself. And as the movie progresses, you see, oh, he does have some sentimentality. Oh, he does care for people. Oh, he's cared for someone before, and then it didn't work out. So some of that is obviously really classic, but the way that they roll it out in the film, the way they tease it out, it shows a depth to the character that, while maybe a little trite at this point in cinematic history, and maybe even for noirs in general, it's just done so well that you don't even care. You're like, this is what I'm looking for if I'm watching a noir film. So I loved that. And there's also just like old school detective stuff. He goes into like the old records office in the LA County, records place library, and he does some old school detective instead of microfiche back in the day. It's these giant books that he's going through to try to figure out who's buying up this land. What is the water, the drought have to do with these important water companies, and why are they like literally like throwing water away in a time when LA is in a drought? And that's like a big like question mark. Like, okay, so obviously there's some kind of corruption going on. So he's like figuring that out, and of course the records guy is giving him a hard time, and he does this simple stuff like he asks for a ruler, once again annoying his way into getting his way. It's just about what you're willing to ask for, what you're willing to push. And he gets the ruler, and he says he's using it to read better for his eyes, but really he's using it so he can more easily rip out a page that he needs for his records. So just another little detective trick. It's just one of those things that you're not going to see today. That's why it's so good that this movie is a period piece, because you can see these old school detective trips that are really nice. There's also just like, there's some humor in his character too. Maybe not always what he's doing exactly, but what's happening to him. For example, there's just like basically a running joke where as he's kind of investigating these things, he's always running into trouble and getting beat up. There's the famous scene where he gets his nose cut by the director, Roman Polanski. I clocked that. And then there's also a scene where he goes into an orange grove, and he's like, that's like a chaotic scene where he's coming through, and they think that he's poaching their oranges or something. And so they start shooting at him, and he crashes the car, and they start beating each other up, and he's getting, the snot beat out of him. And I'm just like, man, he just can't catch a break, can he? And then there's another scene where he's outside of the retirement home, as you saw. And that time he's more beating them up, but then he has to run away. And so it's just lots of brawls. And it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, that if you're digging deep into this situation and you keep running into people who are like harming you, then you're probably on the right track of your investigation. So I thought that was just a funny little like running joke, and it made his character, like, once again, it's just like he has depth. He also has a lightness to him. There's a humor to what's going on, so you can take this movie seriously, but there's also, it's not always so overbearingly serious. The film is not depressing. It's just kind of like interesting. Although we'll get into the end, because the end is quite depressing. So, talking about his character and kind of wrapping it up, he's the heart of the movie, and his character is both written to perfection, but is also played incredibly well. I mean, Jack Nicholson, as beat a dead horse here, but this is one of his best roles, and this is why, as we've been talking, his character is well written, but it's also well portrayed. And so those two things, the word marriage is coming up a lot here, because there is just a great confluence of so many different factors that in so many different movies, it's like one is lacking and the other is good. And this movie, that's just firing on all cylinders. So, and obviously too, you can tell that Jack Nicholson really likes this character. He's just embodying it. And you know, in real life, he must like the character, because 20 years later in 1990, he makes the sequel. He actually is the one who directs it, the movie The Two Jakes, which I didn't even know until recently. There was a sequel to Chinatown. I think most people probably don't know that. But yeah, he makes a sequel to the movie playing the same character, and he's the one that's directing it. So obviously he likes Jay Gittes. So as we wrap up this review, we got to talk about the ending. And with the ending, we're talking about the title itself, Chinatown. One of my favorite things about this movie is that Chinatown is this kind of mythical being, because it's always being mentioned. I think I counted 5 or 6 times that it's thrown out before you actually get to Chinatown, where it's like, hey man, this is not Chinatown anymore, or what happened to Chinatown? And he's like, oh man, I don't know, it's just Chinatown. Everyone's talking about Chinatown. As you go through the movie, you realize that Jake was a detective, an actual detective for the LAPD, and he was stationed in Chinatown, and that's where a lot of his history comes from. And so, of course, the movie has to wrap up into Chinatown as everything kind of comes to fruition. You figure out all this stuff about the corruption and who's really in charge. The guy who owns the Albacore Club is also the father of Faye Dunaway's character, the one who was in cahoots with Mr. Mulray, as they used to have be in charge of the water company. But then Mr. Mulray, who has more of a heart, wanted it to go public, so it became like a public water system. But of course, the powerful father of Faye Dunaway's character is the one that's pulling all the strings. He's the one buying all the land so that they can flood the valley, the LA Valley, so they can build up a whole new section. And it's all corruption and everything. But they also find out, and once again, this is a spoiler, but I think at this point you should know, because you've seen the movie. Faye Dunaway, the person that Mr. Mulray was supposed to be having an affair with, was actually Faye Dunaway's daughter, and also her sister, which is obviously some rough stuff. So Mrs. Mulray's father had a child with her, so there's some incest going on, which is not great.
My father and I understand. Or is it too tough for you?
And so that is like kind of the impetus between a lot of what's going on. So you've got like this more grandiose thing going on with the corruption that's at the heart of it is Miss Mulray's father, but also at the heart of the personal story, the thing that Jake is also trying to figure out, which is what's going on with Faye Dunaway. And that the heart of that is also the father, because he had an incestuous relationship with his daughter, and they have he has a daughter and granddaughter together. Oof. Anyway, so it all leads to Chinatown, because they're trying to flee the city, flee LA, and all the characters are running together. The old detective buddies of Jake. Jake is coming there, and then also Mrs. Mulray's father and Faye Dunaway and her daughter herself, and everyone's together. And the reveal of Chinatown is really well done. It's just like, boom, you're here. And I think the score was also really great in that scene. You see the lights. They're like, basically the camera's driving down the street, and you see the Chinatown lights kind of flying past. And after 2 hours of just this build up to Chinatown, you finally see it. And I think it's really well done. But here's the thing. That scene is only like 5 minutes long. Like, the ending sequence is not very long. Everything happens really fast. Everyone confronts everyone, and then Faye Dunaway shoots her father, then tries to run away, and then the cops are like, let's shoot her because she just shot this guy, because they don't know the whole story. And as they're shooting her, she's driving away, you hear the honking of the horn, and you know, did Faye Dunaway just get shot? And you start hearing her daughter scream, and you know, oh my God, she did. And they run up to the car, and you see the bullet hole through the front of her face. Very brutal, especially for a movie that wasn't very brutal coming up to this point. The ending is so shocking. I know the ending is one of the most famous parts about this movie, but I wasn't necessarily ready for that gut punch, to be honest. It was very much like my mouth was agape. And obviously Jack Nicholson is just shocked by what he's seeing. He's saddened and shocked. And then here's the thing. And it's I think it's embodied by the last line of the movie, which I had heard before, but I didn't really know the actual, I guess, context of the movie, which is,
forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown.
Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. He's basically saying, go home, it's Chinatown. You know what happens here. And so what that does is it kind of indicates that this has happened before. Maybe not this exact thing, but as he mentions earlier in the movie, basically he had tried really hard to help a woman out that he was emotionally and romantically involved with, and it only ended up getting her hurt, presumably killed. And so now we have this situation happening again where he's gone down this rabbit hole, and his curiosity has landed him in the lap of romance. And then what is the ultimate culmination of that, of his curiosity, of him trying so hard to help her out? She gets shot through the back of the head. Whew. So it is a gut punch. It's a depressing ending to a movie that wasn't super depressing, and at points it was even kind of light. But of course you've got incest and stuff like that in it, so it's not, it's kind of heavy, but it's just that gut punch, and then the movie is over. So I had always heard the movie kind of had a cliffhanger, but it turns out it's not so much a cliffhanger as it is, I don't know, it drives you off a cliff. It's a gut punch. It's that kind of feeling you get after you fall too far and you're like, oh, like you jumping off a cliff and you get that pit in your stomach. That's how you feel at the end of this movie. I think the thing is it wasn't a cliffhanger as much as it was just an abrupt ending, an ending that just, it happens and that's it. And I think the effectiveness of that is that it leaves you thinking about it afterwards. You're kind of like, oh my God, this whole movie has been working and working and working up to this last 5-minute scene. And then it just happens. It just ends. Everything happens so fast. And then it's, forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. And then he walks away and that's it. So I can see why this ending is so iconic and seen by a lot of filmmakers as extremely influential. And I will say, and I've talked about this before, and I'll probably talk about it a million times afterwards, I love older movies for one fact, and that is that the ending of the movie is always where a lot of the action is. Not the action, but narratively where the culmination of the film is in the last 5 minutes of the movie. Many, many times I'm thinking just off the top of my head, like Eyes Without a Face. I'm sitting there pausing, and I'm like, how is there only 90 seconds of this movie left? There is just no way, because they kind of crescendo everything in the movie up to that last moment. Whereas nowadays they put a bow over everything, and there's like 5 endings to movies, or there's always the exposition where at the end you see the ambulance and everyone's got the blankets on and they had to tie everything up in a bow, or you got to see the epilogue where there's like, what are they doing now after that crazy situation they went through? And it's like, no. Just end the movie when the most important thing happens for the movie's narrative, and then let us sit with it. And this movie is a perfect example of that happening, and I could not be happier about it. So I don't know how long this has been, but I think I did a pretty good job. 9 out of 10, incredible film, worthy of its praise. It really takes the soul of the noir genre and revitalizes it into the modern era, or the modern era of the time. That's why it was a neo-noir at the time. But now we would almost just call it like a noir classic. But it is also proof that noirs can be effective in color. I mean, this is a fully colored movie. The colors in the movie are great. And it still feels like a noir. You wouldn't even bat an eye saying it's a noir film. Everything else is noir about it. So the black and white is not necessary in all noir films, and this shows it. And later you'll see Blade Runner and other films, like I think that's 81, that are colorized as well. That those are neo-noirs set in a sci-fi world. So I really do think that Chinatown probably opened the door of what a noir can be, It doesn't necessarily have to throw back. It just has to have some of these kind of core elements to the genre. So pretty much everything is great about the film. Honestly, now that I've talked about it like this, I do want to give it more than a 9, but I think 9 out of 10 is very fair. I need to watch it multiple times. I think my gut reaction was 9, so I'm going to stick with that. I think the ending was possibly, as I just got done talking about how great it was, that it was abrupt. I think I did want just a little bit more. I hated that she just died. I think more I'm upset with the story than I am with how they did the ending. I think it was good to be abrupt like that, but I'm just upset. I'm upset because all of this culminated in, you know, the main love interest just being shot in the street. It was brutal. So I don't think I could fault the movie for that too much, but 9 out of 10 is fair. Well, I hope you guys like this episode. Next week, we are going to be getting, we're going to be honoring the great late Gene Hackman by doing a neo-noir film set a year later after this movie in 1975, Night Moves, where he goes down to Florida. He's like a hard-boiled detective going down to Florida. So that sounds really exciting to me. I don't really know anything else about the movie, so I'm very excited to get into it. I hope you guys have a great week this week, and I will see you next Friday.